repelled the first wave, but the Echo tanks keep pushing.
The anomaly won't let us go that easily, guys. The Echo tanks are trying to destroy us and our portal. We need to repel all enemy waves while the Babylon engineers look for a workaround. Vehicle spotted. Them. Now a short break before the next wave. The enemy is stepping up their attack. Get ready for a new wave.
Quite nicely. And I don't want to go into too much details about this, but I'd rate this very, very highly at tier 10. So overall, what do I think about the Panzer 7 line, and what skill level would I give it? Well, it's going to be a medium skill cap, because it's definitely not something for a beginner to just go into, and then they can just roll over their keyboard and get kills. It's a little bit more finesse than that, and the more you know about the vehicles, the better you'll become. Now we move on to the mouse. This actually follows on from the Tiger P. So going along the Panzer 7 line up until the Tiger P, you then go to the VK 101P. This is one of the best tanks to do your blocking missions with in the game. This entire line, starting from this tank, is all about the armor. You are slow, but you have lots and lots of armor. You also have quite juicy guns for the tier, and you then can kind of trade quite effectively with other people. Now, some of you may look at this tank and say, Max, how can you tell me that this has armor when look at that cupola on top of the vehicle? And the thing is with this tank is it doesn't actually matter because that cupola is around about 220 millimeters needed to go through it. Now, obviously, if you meet higher tiers, they are not going to struggle with that. But your own tier for the standard rounds and below will struggle trying to pen that. It is also very, very sloped. As you'll see with this cupola, it's very circular, which means that when you are looking at it, there are just going to be so many points that it suddenly just rounds off and becomes like an auto bounce that, yeah, most of the time, they'll fire at it, miss, go a little bit wide, left or right, and it just bounces. The only thing you need to really worry about on this vehicle and going up through the tiers is obviously if they have enough pen to go through the cupola, but mainly is the cheeks on these vehicles. Because if they do have high enough pen, which, let's face it, if you're playing your own tier or above and they have premium, the chances are they'll go straight through here to the right and the left of the gun. The lower plate is a weak spot with around about 200 pen needed, so keep that in mind. So yeah, most of the time they shoot this, they go through. But much like with the Panzer 7, where you can actually angle this tank and only expose a little bit of your armor, you can then get some very, very nice bounces on the lower plate. But obviously just be aware if you do this, you then open yourself up to getting tracked through here, which they will pen as well. But this tank really does set you up for the rest of the line, because it is basically this vehicle, but just getting a little bit bigger. Somewhat better at tier 9, but definitely much better at tier 10. And the reason why I say somewhat better at tier 9 is because the Maltion might genuinely be the worst vehicle to grind in the game. It's slow. You got 20 kilometers an hour. You have 7 power to weight, and yeah, you have 440 alpha, 220 standard pen, your premium pen is 260, you have a cupola which everybody will pen no matter what, because at tier 9 now, they really don't care. And not to mention, you actually have the turret, which is more akin to a mouse, which has much bigger cheeks for them to hit. This tank sucks. I don't care what people say, this is not a nice vehicle. Because no matter what you try and do when you try and angle your armor, angle your turret, do whatever you might try to do like you would in a mouse, which is the upcoming tank, this cupola exists. And it will always exist, and it will always get penetrated. You also don't have a completely flat side profile when it comes to the turret, which means that when they are looking at this, it's actually a lot easier to pen because it bows outwards and goes from the middle. You do have 490 alpha, but the problem with this line is that the penetration sucks. There's no easy way to put this. The standard pen for the rest of this tank and then the mouse, you might as well not bother with it. I mean, okay, at tier 9, it's not too bad. But at tier 10, 246 standard pen is just laughable. But once you do slowly make your way through the Maltion, you do get to the mouse. And this thing is just a joy to play. However, you need to know everything about your vehicle to make it truly work. And even I myself can't make this work 100% of the time. This is a stupidly high skill cap tank to be able to make it just absolutely dominate anything you meet. You are very slow. You have such amazing armor, and if you angle it correctly, which is why I'm saying that you really need to know every single bit about your tank, if you angle it correctly, you are basically not pennable from anything other than like a Jagdpanzer Z100 with 420 heat. And even then, if you can try to bait him into shooting something that he thinks he can pen but he can't, you still get away with it. This tank is insanely fun, but you need to know what you are doing with it. Because if you are new to the game, do not grind this. You are not going to have a fun time. You're going to get into game, you realize you're very slow, you realize you have no pain with your standard rounds, and they then circle you and you die. So the mouse line, where do I rate it? It's high skill cap. There's no other way of putting it. You need to know what you're doing. You are way too slow to make mistakes in this vehicle. Even though your armor can hold up, you need to know how to angle it correctly to make the most out of the vehicle. Okay, hoodie comes off. Moving on to the E100. This tank follows on from where you left off with the Panzer IIIJ. Now, we've already mentioned that these tanks don't really matter too much. You'll get through them and they'll go through pretty fast. The VK31H is a very, very good tier 5 vehicle. It will also teach you a little bit about how the tank is going to perform, but not loads. Because this is obviously still classed as a medium tank, but it's a little bit more of a heavy kind of medium. You get through this pretty quickly again, and then you want to move on to the VK3601H. This thing is quite a little monster at tier 6. Because this gun that you get 220 alpha, but on the premium rounds you can get 194 pen, which is very, very nice. You also have more than enough DPM, it is accurate enough, and yes, this tank in general is pretty fun. You don't have loads and loads of armor, but it does teach you that you are going to be a bit of a boxy vehicle up until around about tier 8. It basically just follows on from the tier 5, but just makes it into a heavy tank. You are obviously slower as well. As you can see here, you go at 50 kilometers an hour, but you only have 11 power to weight. And that's obviously using the stock engine. If you were to upgrade it, it's still only 12. So although you have quite a high top speed, it's going to take you quite a while to actually get to that top speed. But once you go through this, you'll then go to the Tiger 1, which is everybody's most beloved tank, and mainly one of the reasons why people get into this game to go and play this vehicle. Obviously, it is very, very iconic, and in-game, it's not the greatest of vehicles, but it is okay. You get a nice gun, which has 280 alpha damage, good enough stunner pen. Premium pen can be a little bit lacking, especially when you do meet higher tiers. But on the whole, this tank is fine. Treat it like you don't have armor though. If you treat it like you don't have armor and you choose your engagements wisely, and just peek out, try and make a trade as and when you can, you'll do okay. If you think that you have armor in this vehicle, you're going to do very, very badly. Unless you meet lower tier. The problem with this vehicle is you can't actually really side scrape, because as soon as you do, you actually expose this part of the tank, which just gets penned instantly. The frontal armor is useless. It can side scrape, but you need to be aware that this front sticks out way more than you think. Once you do get through the Tiger 1 though, you then go to the Tiger 2, which is just a beautiful vehicle at tier 8. This might be one of my favourite tech tree heavy tanks at tier 8. It is a phenomenal tank. Many people think that this is awful. I just don't understand how you can say this tank is bad. It will teach you how to side scrape, it will give you a lovely gun to play with, and you have workable armor as well. Once you get this thing fully upgraded, yes, you do have the same kind of issue as you do with the VKB, where you can get penned with heat through the forehead and also around the gun. But this will teach you how to side scrape, as I said, and gives you a gun which has 360 alpha, 225 standard pen, and the premium pen with 285. It is lovely to play this vehicle, and it's accurate. Then once you're done with this, you then move on to the E75. And again, you just upgrade from what you had with the Tiger 2. You now have a gun which has 530 alpha damage. Okay, pretty lacking pen for standard rounds, but it's good enough at tier 9. It can be an issue at tier 10, but okay, it's fine at tier 9, the same way that it's fine at tier 9 for the VKB. It doesn't matter that you don't have as much DPM, because you have a much higher alpha, and alpha is king when it comes to this game for heavy tanks. Everything that you would have learned in Tiger 2 instantly goes into the E75. This tank, again, is just a follow-on from the Tiger 2. It's just a bigger Tiger 2, and it is lovely. And then you move on to the tier 10 with the E100, and this might be the go-to tank if you want a super heavy in water tanks currently and you're just starting out. You get a choice of two guns. You get the gun which is reliable, and then you get the gun which is fun. You have a 15 centimeter gun which has 750 alpha, has very, very bad standard pen, but 334 heat rounds, which is very fun to play with. Or you have the reliable gun, as I said, where you have 530 alpha, you have 225 standard pen, and 311 APCR. This is the one that you want to use for actually trying to improve at the game, and this is the one that you want to use if you actually want to just have fun in the tank. You can side scrape in this vehicle, you can go hold down in this vehicle, you can angle your turret in this vehicle, all of it works. It is like a mix between a Tiger 2 and a mouse in that kind of regard, where your turret is very, very flat and you can angle it to then bounce lots and lots of shots. This is a very, very good tank, and should be one of the first things that you consider going down if you are new to the game. So yes, the skill level for this vehicle, pretty low. It teaches you a lot. It will teach you a lot in this vehicle. And the reason why I say that it's so low is that, yes, even though you have to do a little bit of learning, it's a minute amount. And you should learn how to play these vehicles, because once you do, it then sets you up for the rest of the game. So yes, low skill cap, and it is a golden line to go down when you're just starting out. We then move on to the E50M, and this line again is one of those golden lines that you should probably consider going down if you are first starting out, because this is a complete package of a tank, whereas it doesn't excel at any one thing. The line can be somewhat frustrating at times. You start out from the VK3001H, you then divert your way to the VK3002M. This is a good vehicle. It will teach you about medium tanks. You are slightly armoured, not as fast as others, have a good gun, but don't have like massive alpha or massive DPM. As I said, these tanks are middle of the road jack of all trades style of tanks. Once you complete that grind, you then move on to the Panther, which is basically the same vehicle but just a little bit better. You then move on to the Panther 2, which again is very similar, and you start to show the signs of what the tank will become. Because as you can see, once it's fully upgraded, this is starting to look like the E50 and the E50M with this kind of squared off kind of turret area. But up until this point, you've had guns where they've not really been super high alpha. 135 pen at tier 7. You then go back down a tier. You have tanks that have, again, 135 pen. Whereas now you can start going for 280 alpha with a long gun, and it is very nice. And I do mean a long gun, because, yeah. But once you complete your Panther 2 grind, you then get access to the E50, which is arguably the most complete tier 9 medium that you can get your hands on. You do still have the option of using the 280 alpha, however you should not use the 280 alpha. You should use the 390 alpha gun, which has quite lacking penetration, but it's just such a nice tank to play with. I don't ever really feel at a super disadvantage with 270 premium pen. However, there are times when you do. For the most part, I don't, but there are times where you see someone and you just go, well, I just can't pen you. And as you'll see, this is quite similar to what you had at the Panther 2, at least with the turret, but just a little bit more flushed out. You now have a bit more armor, you have a gun that is very good, and you also go at 60 kilometers an hour with weighing 60 tons. Once you do move up to tier 10, however, with the E50M, some people might see it as a downgrade, but you get a gun which is just better. You now basically have your premium rounds that you had on the E50 as your standard rounds, and you have 330 heat at your disposal for your premium rounds. However, if we actually go and have a look at the two guns from the E50 on the left and the E50M on the right, you'll see that the DPM is exactly the same and the rest of the stats are exactly the same. So you don't actually gain any DPM or accuracy or anything like that, you just gain those premium rounds. For me personally, that's enough to have a decent upgrade, but to others, you might not see it that way. In comparison to the E50, the E50M is a little bit more well armoured, not by much though. It still has that kind of jack of all trades role where it doesn't matter what the situation is, it can deal with it pretty well, and it does still get outplayed or outclassed by other tanks which can do a certain role better. But as an overall vehicle, this is just amazing. You can do whatever you want in it, it has forgiving armour to a certain degree, unless you're just being an idiot and out in the open. But for the most times, if you do get a little bit caught out, the armor still holds up. You are actually a little bit faster than the E50 because it does still go at 60 kilometers an hour, but your power to weight is a lot better, and you still weigh 62 tons. So yes, this thing is still a ramming machine, and honestly, the entire line is just nice. So yes, another golden line for the German tech tree. Skill cap level, low. Anyone can play this thing, and anyone can learn in these things. Much like the E100, takes a little tiny bit of learning, but once you do, it's lovely to play. We're now going to move on to the Leo 1. Now, this tank, I'm going to say straight away, shouldn't be the first tank you grind, because this vehicle, it has quite a high skill cap. And the entire line can be quite frustrating if you are new to the game. You follow on from the VK3002M into the VK3002D. This tank is actually very nice. It's very good. And the following on from it with the Indian Panzer is also a fine all-round vehicle. It doesn't really have much armor, but overall it works. You can sometimes get some ricochets here and there on the Indian Panzer, but the main reason why you play it is because the gun is quite nice. You have good enough accuracy and 250 alpha. 250 alpha is by no means excellent at tier 8, but it is fine. This again is just one of those all-rounder tanks that is fine, and you just hopefully go through it without too many issues. The thing is with this vehicle and following on is that you don't ever want to be on the front line or even on the second line. Maybe second line for support, but you want to be a little bit further back as just that true support sniper tank. And that is where you really start to come into your own with the Leo PTA. Because you go from having a gun that has 250 alpha with fine standard pen and okay premium pen to then having a gun which has 420 alpha, extremely good standard pen and good premium pen. However, the PTA's gun is nowhere close to what the Leo 1 gun is. This gun has pretty bad soft stats. and it can be incredibly frustrating to play it. Not to mention, you have 0 armor on this vehicle. Anything that hits you will pen you, and also probably will hit your internal modules quite a bit as well. You do not want to get spotted in this tank. It is game over basically if you get spotted, and it is insanely unforgiving if you do. This gun basically mandates a stabilizer on it to make it somewhat usable, because if you don't, it's really not a nice experience. However, once you get to the Leo 1 at tier 10, this still has that insanely high skill cap where, yes, anything that shoots at you is going to pen and you really don't want to get spotted. The exact same role applies with the Leo PTA as it does with the Leo 1. But this gun is lovely. You don't need to worry about the stabilization on this vehicle. You can go without stab and it is absolutely fine. Not to mention that if we have a look at the guns between the two, the Leo PTA on the left and the Leo 1 on the right, you'll see that DPM is all the way up and the accuracy is all the way up, as well as the aim time all the way down. This is one of my favorite tanks in the game, but I'm not going to be blinded by that fact because it is a very, very hard tank to play. If you're brand new to the game, do not go down this line. You need to have experience and understanding of where to go on the maps before you even consider playing this vehicle. So for the skill level, it's going to be high for the Leo 1. And it's definitely not one of those tanks that you want to go down first. And finally for the German tech tree, we have the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen, which is more of a light tank, medium tank combo than just a pure light tank. The entire line is a bit like this as well. I mean, maybe the tier 7 and the tier 8 aren't too bad as pure lights, but you still have the kind of... You have the DPM there. The firepower is always there in this line. It's one of the best damage dealing light tanks lines that you can go down. But it's also just not that great at actually scouting. The Leopard at tier 5 is very funny. You then have your VK2801, which is fine. It's a bit of a box of a vehicle, but it's fine. You'll get through it. You then have this SP1C, which again, quite reduced in size and is actually quite good for camo rating. As you'll see here, it has 16.2 camo rating. We just upgraded the turret to the fully upgraded one. It actually has a little bit less camo with the upgraded turret than it does with the stock one. But this is okay camo rating. It's nothing exceptional for light tanks, but it is good. You then move up to the Hawk 12, and ignore that I haven't actually researched these. I've played all of these on like press accounts and stuff like that. So on my live account, I haven't bothered touching this. I just went straight for the tier 10. But for this, it's again the same kind of story. You do get a good enough gun, as you can see here, like 240 alpha with 180 standard pen, 250 heat as the premium pen. It's very nice as a light tank for tier 8, but it's not the greatest scout. Considering you can have an even 90 playing against you, yeah, I know which one I'd rather play. And then you have the RU251, which is like a mini Leo 1. You actually get camo rating and you do go fast enough, but it's quite big and long to actually find a bush to accommodate you. And then moving up to the tier 10, which is, yes, as you can see, it's again quite a big vehicle. This tank will struggle with camo rating, however, it definitely doesn't struggle with view range because this is 420 base and it will see absolutely everything. On the whole, this line is fine, but it's not the best light tank. And that can be a problem for some people, but if you want to maybe try and learn light tanks from what you've been playing medium tanks wise, then it can maybe work in that regard. It's not a tank line that I would recommend you to go down straight away, and it's probably a medium skill level overall, because it's not a super high skill level to actually get the most out of it, but it's also not super easy. So no, I wouldn't recommend you go down this straight away. There are better lines to go down for your first light tank grind than the RHM, because this is quite unforgiving at times. Also, you will flip this vehicle. I don't care who you are, you're going to flip it at some stage. We're now moving into the Soviet tech tree, and we're starting out with the Object 268 V4. This tank line splits off from the SU-100 at tier 6 into the SU-100 M1. Before this, you have the obviously MS1 at tier 1, and you have light tank, then tank destroyer at tier 4. So starting from tier 4 is where you can really start to play the class that you're going to play eventually. The SU-76M is a good vehicle, the SU-85 is good, and the SU-100 is good. So you will not have any issues leading up to the SU-100M1, or at least you shouldn't. However, both the SU-85 and the SU-100 don't really teach you what the V4 is all about. You see, these don't really have that much armor, have a good enough gun, and that's about it. They're your average tank destroyer that can sometimes go and bounce a few shots if they're lucky, but most of the time they don't really have the armor to withstand it. But they do have good enough guns to fight back. When you go up to the SU-100M1 at tier 7 though, you now have quite a bit of armor, and this is how the tank will be at tier 10. You have a rear mounted tank, as you can see here, and basically the entire upper frontal bit is just unpennable, at least for your own tier. And the superstructure is also very, very well angled and will bounce a lot. Interestingly enough, you actually go down in the alpha damage from 390, which you had at the SU-100, to now 250. But this is still very, very good. As you can see, the DPM is good, but the accuracy not so much. The SU-100M1 really is quite a little bit of a terror at tier 7, or at least can be if you don't really know how to deal with it. So you shouldn't really have any issues with this tank. The only thing that you need to watch out for is the gun arc. It isn't a lot. So that means that when you're actually turning the barrel of the tank, it can't go from left and right very far before it needs to start turning the entire tank to then kind of lock onto what you're aiming at. The exact same thing goes for the SU-101. This is, again, very well armored, but has a very weak gun arc and can cause you issues. This thing also loves taking module damage, so we'll keep that in mind as well. However, with this vehicle, when you get the fully upgraded gun, which is a full-fledged tier 10 gun, as you can see, it looks absolutely insane. You have 440 alpha, 258 standard pen, and 340 heat at tier 8. This is very, very good. Your accuracy isn't that great, but let's be honest, you have so much pen, and you should be in the front line kind of area, that it shouldn't matter. It can be frustrating to play this tank, especially with the gun arc, especially with module damage, but you have a gun that is very good. Now, I will say, as much as the gun is very, very good, there is a bigger issue with this vehicle and the entire line, which is the gun depression. This vehicle in particular only has -3 degrees, which you definitely need to watch out for. However, I will say that most of the time you're brawling and it doesn't matter too much, but in scenarios where you do need it, you really do miss it. You then go on to the 263, which basically goes, yes, you know that you had nice armor at tier 8, have some more. And yes, we know that you had a nice gun at tier 8, have some more. Because this cheese grater gun has 550 alpha with 270 standard pen. However, you are now down on the premium pen because you no longer have the 340 heat. But if you were to go ahead and use the stock gun, you could still have your 340 heat because that is the exact same gun that you last played with. But this time it actually has a little bit more DPM. But this 550 alpha really is what you should be using. This cheese grater gun here, very, very good. And then finally you move on to the V4, which, you know how we're speaking about cheese grater guns? Well, yeah, there you go. It's now got an even bigger cheese grater gun. This now has 650 alpha with 293 standard pen with 360 heat rounds as the premium round. But the V4, you trade off a lot of the mobility as well that you just played with at the tier 8 and the tier 9. You now go substantially slower, where you're just playing with the 263 at 55 kilometers an hour. You're now playing at only 40 kilometers an hour, but you do get more armor. And if you don't really know where to shoot the V4, you just aren't going to pen it. Because if you shoot the lower plate, that's a bounce. That's not a lower plate that you can actually pen. It has a lower plate, which you can then pen. Nice. So in general, this line actually isn't that high for the skill cap. It's actually a very, very low skill cap. However, it can be frustrating to play it because of the limited gun arcs. And for that reason, I wouldn't say that you should go down this straight away. I'd say you should probably go and play a heavy tank if you want to learn this kind of playstyle, because it is more playstyle of like a heavy tank than a true tank destroyer. Your assault tank destroyers at the end of the day, but it is still a low skill cap tank. The V4 before it got nerfed would have been just a straight up go and grind it tank, but now after the nerf, it's not as good as it was, and rightly so, because that thing was broken. But it's still a good tank, and yes, you could go and grind it, but at the same time, not one of the first ones. I think to learn the tank destroyer, assault tank destroyer playstyle, you should go and learn a heavy tank first. Next up we have the Object 268. Now to preface this, this is before the 268 got buffed, but I'm going to act as if it has got buffed and then speak about it, because I played it quite a lot on the test server, and it doesn't really play too dissimilarly from what it is now, but it's just a little bit faster and better overall. The line, as you see, will go from the SU-100. You then go to the SU-152, which is a fan favourite among the community because you do get the derp gun with the 910 alpha damage with 86 pen. This can be very, very funny, and many people do love it. You can alternative play with 2 other DPM guns, and it upgrades as you go along. but it's up to you which one you want to play with. You then go to the ISU 152, which is another fan favourite, which has the 152mm gun with 750 alpha, 260 center pen, and 292 premium APCR pen. And then once you move on from that, you go to the 704, and it's just nice overall. Again, you get the BL10 gun, which was previously on the ISU 152, then they removed it and changed it for the gun that you now see here, the D4S, I believe. If I'm correct in saying that, I believe so. But now the BL10 is only on the 704. As you see, the D4S is still here, so it's very, very beneficial for you to go and make sure you get the D4S on the ISU. Then you don't have to grind it once you're on the 704. Because otherwise, you're actually then using a 704 with a derp gun, which only has 250 pen. Don't do that. Make sure, if you're riding the ISU, get the D4S. But the 704, again, is a very, very lovely tank in general. And again, a fan favourite. It's just a good line. The entire line is nice, and the 268 is a good vehicle. You get 303 stunner pen, which is AP, and then you have 395 heat rounds for the premium rounds on this vehicle. It's lovely. Plus, it is obviously getting buffed, and probably when you watch this video, it would have been out by then. And in general, it's a good line. So yes, the 268 line, it accommodates no matter what your playstyle is. They are versatile tanks for a reason, even though that they are more support tank destroyers than anything else. And in my opinion, another golden line that if you're brand new to the game, you can go and get this, because the whole line is quite forgiving and also will teach you about how to play tank destroyers as well. Next up, we have the Object 277. And I will tell you right now, this is one of the #1 tanks that I say everybody should go and get if they're brand new, because it is a very nice line altogether. The thing is with this line, MS1 at tier 1, you go all the way up to the KV1 at tier 5, and this is where you then start to learn how to play heavy tanks. Obviously, the T28 and anything before it, and just in general, tier 1 to 4, doesn't really matter for any tank line, because you'll go through it pretty fast and get to tier 5 pretty soon after you've just started playing, especially with all the bonuses that you'll get if it's a brand new account. But the KV1 really will teach you how to play heavy tanks and give you that kind of confidence to then progress through the line and learn about the different ways of angling your armor and what to watch out for. From there, you then go to the KV1S, which is basically the same tank, which is a little bit better. You do, however, get the chance to put a derp gun on it. I wouldn't do this. Don't bother with this. Go and stay with the 85mm gun here. Is a much better choice. From there, you then move on to the IS, which is where it starts to form what is going to happen a little bit later on. Not fully, because it's not really the same as like a 277, but you can start to get the alpha damage, and it's a little bit more forgiving with the armor, and just in general, you will learn a little bit more in the IS than you would have done with the others. With this vehicle, you get the 390 alpha damage gun, which is so commonly associated with Soviet heavy tanks around this kind of tier, and you also learn about angling of the armor and what you can and can't do. You then go on to the IS-3, which is, in recent time, it needs probably a little bit of love, because you do just get overmatched on the roof pretty much every single time, even if it's fully upgraded, as you'll see here. This roof line here is just a straight overmatch for most guns that you meet. Not to mention, you have a pike nose, which will teach you how to not side scrape, because you can't side scrape. Even more so in the IS, that you kind of learnt that you can't really side scrape in it. But this, you really can't side scrape, because this then becomes flat and easily pennable. You then go to the T10, which in my opinion is much better than the 257. The 257 is idiot proof, but it has to be played against an idiot. The T10 on the other hand has a gun which is just amazing. You have 340 heat, much more than what you get the 257, and you also have very, very good standard rounds with 440 alpha. You are, however, lacking armor in the hull armor department in comparison to the 257. But the turret is really, really good, and you will bounce a lot on this vehicle. This sets you up perfectly for what the 277 is. A fast, hold down tank which can get into positions, doesn't have a lot of gun depression, but has the ability to just move around the map and be more of a fast, medium kind of heavy tank playstyle. But everything gets you ready for the 277, which at tier 10 is beautiful. 130 caliber gun, 490 alpha, 265 standard pen, and 340 heat rounds. Honestly, this gun is the main reason why I'd prefer to play this tank as a brand new account, or if I was relearning World of Tanks. I'd rather play the 277 than the IS-7, purely because of the pen. Even though the IS-7 is more well armoured than the 277, or more forgiving, I should say, with its armour layout, the gun just is horrible in the IS-7 in comparison to this thing. And just because I said that this tank's armour is not as good as the IS-7 does not mean that it has no armour at all, because this turret is very, very strong still. And not to mention that the speed that you see on this tank is real. It's not IS-7 speed where it's fake, where it has terrible train distances and it never reaches that top speed. On the 277, you will see this top speed. So the 277 line, again, this is a golden tech tree. You should go down this if you're starting out. People will argue to the ends of the earth which one is better, either the IS-7 or 277, and let them, because it doesn't matter at the end of the day. You have one preference or the other, and it doesn't really matter which one you choose. But in my opinion, I'd rather play the 277. Which then brings us on to the IS-7. The only other tank that we haven't spoken about in this line is the 257. The reason why I said this tank is idiot-proof is because the thing is, you have all of this armour, and the side armour is very troll, the frontal armour is very troll, lower plate is very small, but you just go through the roof every time. And that's the issue. If people know what they're doing against a 257, it dies very quickly. If you meet an idiot that doesn't know what they're doing, and they're just going to auto-aim at you or something like that, yes, you can just absolutely farm them. But the other thing is, it has 440 alpha, the exact same as the T10, but you have less pen on the standard rounds and less pen on the premium rounds. It just doesn't really feel as good. And then once you do get to tier 10 with the IS-7, the gun really doesn't feel good. You have 490 alpha, exactly the same as the 277, but instead of having the, what was it, 265 for the standard pen for the 277, you get 250, and you don't get 340 heat, you get 303 APCR, which is very far behind what the 277 gets. As we'd already mentioned about the speed of this vehicle, it doesn't really have the top speed that it mentions. If we go over into here, you'll see that it says 64 kilometers an hour. It won't reach that unless you do a massive speed build on it. And it just feels like a bit of a letdown in comparison to the 277. If this tank got a pen buff, I would 100% recommend this tank over the 277. But until that happens, I would recommend the 277. And this is not me saying the IS-7 is bad and you shouldn't grind it, because you should grind it. It's a lovely tank. But in comparison to 277, I'd much rather play that. And to be honest with you, I'd actually say that you need a slightly higher skill cap in the IS-7 because of the fact that you just don't have the pen. You need to know where you're shooting and if you're actually going to pen what you're shooting. Otherwise, you really just won't get damage in this thing. And the more experienced you are as a player, the better the IS-7 will become. Next up, we have the 705A. Following on from where the IS is, at tier 7, you get the ISM. This tank is your typical rear-mounted turret tank. It is a side-scraping god, and yes, it barely has any weak spots on the turret once it's fully upgraded. It is a good vehicle. You should go through this pretty easily and not really have too many issues. Yes, obviously, they will get penned with high pen heat rounds, etc., but it shouldn't take too long to just grind through and get the 705, which is a lovely tank at tier 9. And the top gun on the 705 is actually the IS-7's gun, but you're a tier below, and because you're a tier below, it feels much nicer to play with. So you get that 490 alpha, that 250 standard pen, and 303 APCR, which, I'm not going to lie to you, it does sometimes feel lacking, but most of the time, you're playing tier 9, or even against tier 8s, you're not having any issues there. And you now have yourself a tank which is a true side-scraping god. This thing is just beautiful. You don't get overmatched on the roof here. You don't have to worry about any of that. It is a lovely tank to learn how to side-scrape in. And then once you go through that, you then get to the 705A, which is just even better. And yes, you now have a 650 alpha damage gun. And honestly, this line in general is just a good line to grind. I wouldn't say that it's the first line you should grind. If you want to grind a line which is more of a heavy style tank, then the E100 is probably a better line to actually learn in than the 705. But this is a very nice line. Low skill cap, you learn how to side scrape, it will teach you along the way, and at the end of it, you get a very nice tank. We now move on to the IS-4, which turns off from the KV-1 and leads to the T150. Now the T150 really does teach you what the rest of the line is going to be like. Good at side scraping and good armor all round. The nice thing about the T150 is that it does get this 107 caliber gun with 300 alpha. Very, very nice for tier 6. You then move up to the KV-3, which is basically the same tank as the T150, but with a bit better turret and more well armoured all round. You then go to the KV-4, which is even more well armoured and a true fortress. You may hear the term KV Fortress when it's referred to this tank because it really is very well armoured. When you get this thing fully maxed out, you'll see that yes, this is just a monster. It can side scrape, it can go hold down. Yes, it can still be penned in the cupola, but it isn't super easy to pen this either. Overall, a really good tank for the KV-4. You then move on to the ST1, which is a slight departure of where it was going, where it's a bit more of a boxy tank, as you see, like it's quite a kind of straight, kind of rectangle kind of hull, whereas now when we go up to the ST1, you'll see that it's a little bit more angled and sloped. But this actually moves into how the IS-4 is going to be. You have insanely good armor all round on the hull armor, and the turret is very good. This is a weak spot up here, but again, it's not super easy to pen either. And a really nice thing about this vehicle is that you do get the IS-4's gun down at tier 9 with the ST1. So you have that 440 Alpha, 258 standard pen, and 340 heat, all at tier 9, which is lovely. And then you move up to tier 10, which I don't know why this even has this stock gun, because you would need to go and grab this gun before you even get the IS-4, so it doesn't make sense that this gun's even here. But either way, the IS-4 is an absolute monster. You can side scrape with this vehicle and even over angle the sides, and you can get a lot of bounces where you think, how is that actually bouncing? Because I'm at an angle that is way too, overexposed, but the side armor is just that good. The gun is fine, however, the only real issue with this vehicle is that you don't get that many rounds, and you will run into games where you do run out of ammo. Apart from that though, it's a solid tank. So again, this line, very low skill cap. It will teach you about side scraping. Is it better than getting a 705A? Probably. It's a little bit more flexible than the 705A, but also then you don't have the alpha of that tank either. So it's up to you which one to pick, but definitely another low skill cap tank, or tank line to go down. We're now going to be speaking about the ST2. This follows along the same line up to the KV-3, which it then departs and goes to the IS-22. All of these tanks along this line have double-barreled guns, and yes, you can shoot both of them at the same time. However, you do need to be careful about firing one barrel and then the other, because you can ruin your DPM in that regard. It works quite similarly in a way of an auto-reloader system, where if you don't have that extra shell in your gun and you fire, it then cancels out whatever reload you had going and restarts it. The IS-22 at tier 8 is fine. It's nothing special. You can still pen it. It's not like it's a super great hold down vehicle. Even with a fully upgraded turret, it's still not amazing. However, it is good enough to play against most of the stuff that you meet. The armor is also not that great. You can't really side scrape because this then becomes a little bit flatter and you can pen it. And also it obviously has this lower plate issue. But overall, it's fine. The gun is good. You have 300 alpha, which you can obviously shoot twice and then have 600. And you have 221 standard pen and 256 for the premium pen. The premium pen being APCR. Your dispersion is also not that bad. And if you're at close range, yes, you can just double and then deal a nice 600 alpha there. Once you get to the IS-32, this is, for many people, the highlight of this line. You have a very good strong turret. You have a pike nose at the front, which you need to be careful of. So you obviously can't side scrape. But overall, the gun is lovely. You have 390 alpha, which obviously you can do ×2 for that. So that is very nice to see. And the thing is with this vehicle, the standard rounds are not that great at 243, which is okay, but no one's going to say that that's amazing. But then the premium round is APCR of 292, which is very nice. Remember, we're at tier 9. We're not quite at tier 10, where that would be not that great. There is times when you do meet people, and that is just not enough. If you meet, for example, like a Type 5 Heavy, you can start getting into issues, especially if he's angled just slightly. Then, yes, that can be a bit of a problem. But on the most of the time, this is more than enough. And your dispersion is also 0.4, which, up close, really doesn't matter. So this is a very nice hold-down tank with a good gun and decent enough top speed as well. It goes at 38 with 14 pound to weight, and it has 1,800 hit points. Very good overall as a package. You then get up to the tier 10, which doesn't really feel the same, because this is the ST2, which is basically the ST1, but with double barrels. Although I will say the armor layout is a lot better than the ST1, so it's not like you have the same armor layout a tier below and it's just been bumped up to tier 10. It is better. You have 440 alpha, you have 258 standard pen, and 310 heat pen. Very nice. Again, you have that 0.4 dispersion, the exact same as the IS-32. But as you can see, you still have this weak spot up here, which is sort of a weak spot, but then sort of isn't at the same time. But you also have the frontal bit here, lower plate, obviously you can easily pen. And at tier 10, this does become pretty easy to pen for most people, especially if they're firing premium. They're going to go straight through the front here. But overall, the tank is good. It's fine. No one's going to say that this is a bad vehicle. The gun feels nice. You don't need stab on this vehicle. It can work very, very well. So overall, medium skill level, because you need to kind of learn a little bit about the gun. But apart from that, the tanks are pretty forgiving for the most part. You obviously need to be wary of the pike nose design, and maybe the IS-22 could be a little bit unforgiving as well. But on the whole, I mean, the line in general is pretty good. We now move on to the Object 430U. Now, this vehicle is not really a medium tank. It shares the medium tank class and it shares the medium tank line with the 140, but it's not really a medium at the end of the day. Starting out, you obviously go down to the BT7, then you go to the T34. The T34 will teach you the basics of medium tanks and is very, very good for learning medium tanks. You then go up to the T34-85, which again is just a follow-on, a nice successor to the T34. The exact same can be said about the T43 and the T44. So far, this is just pure learning how to medium tank, and everything is very, very similar to the last tank. You then, however, split off from the line and go to the 430, which is very different from the T44. This tank is not only one of the best stock grinds in the game because there's basically nothing for you to research, but it's also one of those tanks that you start to realize this is more of a heavy medium than a pure medium. This has very good armor on the turret and on the hull, and combined with this, you can afford to go around with the heavy tanks and support them rather than going around with the medium tanks and supporting them. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't go with your medium tanks, because you can, and you're a very, very hard tank to actually fight for other medium tanks. But you also don't have the gun depression. You actually have -5 degrees, which can be a bit of a problem, especially if you're on a medium tank line where you do need a little bit of gun depression, because yes, fighting other tanks on ridge lines, etc., you're not in for a fun time. You do get a 390 alpha damage gun with 238 standard pen, which is not good at all. A bit better than what you get at the E50. But then you do also get APCR, as the premium round with 270. So exactly the same kind of alpha damage and pretty similar DPM actually to what you get on the E50. However, this one is nowhere close to being the accuracy of the E50. And then once you move through the 430, you go to the 430U, which then gets a 440 alpha damage gun, 252 standard pen, and 340 heat, which is really, really nice. And you're basically a heavy tank at this stage, because this is, for many people, a better 113. You have the armor, you have the pen, and you also have mobility. And combined, it's very, very powerful. But overall, this line is another golden line. Like, you should go and grind this if you're new to the game, but for different reasons. Like, it will teach you about medium tanks up until tier 8, and then if you want to maybe learn about heavy tanks and how they play as well, while still being fully flexible to play as a medium tank, this is the line. Because you can basically go and do whatever you want. If you want to go to the medium tank flank, go and do it. If you want to go to the heavy tank flank, go and do it. It's incredibly flexible. The only thing that you really do need to watch out for on this vehicle is the gun depression. Again, -5, just like the 430. We're now going to go and speak about the Object 140, which shares the same line as the 430U, but it splits off from the T44 to the T54. This is the line that kind of continues on from the T44. And you do just get better and better and better as you keep going up. The thing is with the T54 at tier 9 is that you get the choice of 2 guns, and none of them are really that nice if you don't want to spam gold. Because as you can see, this has 201 pen or 219 pen for the standard round. And then you get 330 heat as the premium round for both. Yeah, you either have a gun which has bad accuracy but higher DPM, or you have better accuracy but lower DPM. And for most people, this is where it is just a massive credit sink to actually grind out the T54 to then go and get the tier 10. So just be warned that it's probably going to cost you a fair amount to actually grind out the T54 to get the 140. But once you do get the Object 140, it's quite a nice vehicle. The only problem with this tank, and I mean genuinely the only problem with this tank, is that it's 320 alpha. In nowadays world of tanks, that's not that good. With the amount of tanks that have 390 alpha and 360 alpha, 320 really does feel very, very low. And with the amount of track HP in the game now as well, 320 really doesn't help itself there. Perma-tracking someone used to be the 140 speciality, now it just struggles. Besides that though, you are pretty well camoed, you're fast enough at going 55 in top speed, and you also have a little bit of armor, not loads, especially hardly any in the hull, but the turret armor is pretty good, with 2 cupolas that you can still get penned. And unlike most other Soviet mediums, this actually has minus 7 degrees of gun depression, which means it can sort of play a ridge line up to a certain degree. Well, 7 degrees actually, max. But unlike the T-54, which you've just played, you have 264 standard pen with very nice shell velocity, and 330 heat with not so nice shell velocity, but it's 330 heat at the end of the day. But honestly, the biggest issue is the alpha damage. It just feels really quite lacking in nowadays World of Tanks. And to be honest, I don't see the point of grinding this when you could just go and play an STB1. And so for the skill level, medium, because it's not easy to play these tanks, especially considering with the lower alpha, and you do need to know what you're doing, especially considering that you don't have loads and loads of armor like you do with the 430U. We then move on to the K91, which was fairly recently buffed, and a lot of people said that this tank was over buffed, etc, etc. We'll get into that. The tank line starts from the T34 going into the A43. This is the last tank in the line that is a front mounted turret, as you can see here. Past this, with the A44 and the 416, the 432 and the K91, they're all rear mounted turreted tanks. The A43 is your typical Soviet tier 6 medium tank. It's pretty good. The A44 is annoying. But the reason why it's annoying is not because of the gun or anything else really. It's that you have this hump in the middle of the tank, which means you can't depress your gun down low enough over the front. And the worst part about this is that if you move around to the side, you would think, oh, but I have more gun depression over the sides here or here, right? No, you have 4 degrees everywhere. So even though that, yes, you get a 300 alpha damage gun, the exact same gun that is on the T150, it doesn't really mean much. Because yes, the alpha is okay. We're a tier higher than what the T150 would be, so you need to take that in consideration as well. It's a nice tank, apart from the fact that the gun depression really sucks. So just keep that in mind when you are grinding this. Apart from that, it's okay. You then move into the 416, which is where this line truly starts to form into its own. The only thing that you really need to watch out for with the 416 is that you don't get gun depression. You only have -4 again. However, you also don't have fully traversable turret. This does not go round all the way. You will stop around about this sort of angle here, and then you need to turn the tank. Apart from that, you have the DPM, you have the alpha, you have the pen. It's all good. This is a pretty nice sweet spot in the line, to be fair. You then move up to the Object 430 version 2, which you get a very nice gun upgrade, 246 standard pen with 330 heat, and the DPM is really, really nice. Good accuracy as well. And while you do gain a fully traversable turret with -4 degrees of gun depression all round, you also have less camo overall. So with that big DPM increase comes a few decreases elsewhere. But it's still fully playable, and eventually you'll get to the K91. The gun is still pretty similar. You are now up to 276 standard pen though, with still that 330 heat. It is much more accurate and has a very, very nice aim time as well, and the DPM has risen dramatically. You now have 3,368 base DPM on this vehicle. This tank also gets a fully traversable turret. However, around the sides of the vehicle, you actually get -9 degrees of gun depression, which is a massive, massive change. Over the front, however, you do only get -5, so keep in mind, if you are going to be going over a ridgeline, you're probably going to need to go over the side of the vehicle to get the most out of it. But the thing is with this line is that even though it is a very, very good sniper line, it still has 320 alpha. And as a sniper, I would want more. It's actually quite rare to use the full DPM potential with the K91 unless you do get someone that just sits out in the open. So this is actually a very, very high skill cap tank line to play, and it is definitely not for everyone. I don't like these tanks at all. I really don't like the K91, not to mention the gun on the K91. It doesn't feel as accurate as it seems. In game, this gun will just miss randomly, and I don't know why, but it does. So it's definitely a high skill cap level, and definitely not one that people should go down first to try and play. And finally, we move on to the T100 LT. This is probably the best starting out tech tree line to go down for light tanks. At least if you want a tracked light tank. The whole entire line is just good. You start out with the BT7 going on to the A20, and this is where you first start learning about light tanks, how they perform differently from other vehicles. And the problem is with lights, up until this point you've been playing light tanks, but really only at tier 5 and beyond are the proper light tanks. At low tier, light tanks could be medium tanks, heavy tanks, it could be whatever you want them to be, because most of the tanks at low tier are just lights. But with the A20, you do feel like a proper light tank. You go fast enough, you can spot, make sure you use binos, because then you get maximum view range out of this, and you'll quickly move on to the MT25. This again just follows on nicely, the exact same thing. It doesn't do anything insultingly bad, it doesn't do anything exceptionally well either, it's just a nice little tier 6 light tank. The LTG, however, is insanely good for the camo rating. As you can see, 19.72% when stationary and moving. This is very, very good to learn how to passively scout in the game. The only thing that you need to be aware of is that obviously this is tier 7, so you don't have access to CVS. So if you get matched up against a tier 8 light tank, they are just so much better than you. But you'll then be brought on to the LTTB. And again, this is a little bit down in camo rating in comparison to the LTG, but overall it is still a complete light tank. And it still goes fast enough, it still has good enough view range, and it still has decent enough camo to at least perform as good as it can. Unfortunately, tier 8 is pretty saturated with light tanks, and it's pretty competitive environment, especially considering, well, ELC even 90, EBR 75 FL10. Good luck. Another departure from the line, sort of, is the T54 lightweight. You don't quite have the same armor as a T54, but you do have like the combat capacity of more of a medium tank than a light tank. However, you definitely don't have the penetration of a medium tank, because this is 208 standard pen and 235 premium pen. No, definitely not. But it can be used in a pinch as more of a lightly armored medium tank than a true light. You have slightly better camo rating than the LTTB, and you do also have more view range. This is fine. It's a little bit more of an all-purpose light tank rather than a true scouting or damage-dealing light tank. And then you move up to the tier 10, which is the T100 LT. And this thing, yes, it's pretty good. 230 standard pen, 248 premium pen, not good. This is what you expect, though, at light tanks at tier 10. They're not going to have exceptional pen because they just don't have that. 280 sort of heat rounds is mostly the maximum that you're going to see on a light tank. And around about this level is pretty normal. DPM is okay, accuracy is awful. But it doesn't matter because this has some of the best soft stats for the gun in the game, which means that it really doesn't bloom out that much when you're on the move. This tank really does do everything. It has good enough camo rating, it has good enough view range, it has good enough firepower. It is a great all-rounder, and better all-rounder than I would say the RHM, in my opinion, for randoms. So if you are going down a light tank line, the T100 LT is definitely one that you should be keeping an eye out for, and in my opinion, a golden line to go down. We now move on to the American Tech Troop, and starting out with the T110E3. This line is another very, very good line to start with. However, it can be very, very slow. So I wouldn't say that this is like a number one go-to line, but if you know what you're getting yourself in for, it can be pretty good. As I said, the problem with this line is that it's slow. You start out by going down the standard tech tree line up until the T6 medium, which you then divert up to the M8A1. From the M8A1 up until the Jackson is a very similar playstyle. They all have turrets and not really any armor, but decent enough guns. You then go to the T25 AT, which is where you start forming into the line. However, this one doesn't really have the armor that the rest of the line has. You no longer have a turret, but you do get a very, very nice gun, 320 Alpha, 198 standard pen with 245 premium pen. Really nice for a tier 7. However, once you move up to the T28, this is when it properly starts to form into the tank that you're going to be playing, the T110E3, at the end. Because now gone is the speed that you had, you're slow, but you have lots and lots of armor. You also have a gun which is 400 Alpha, 246 standard pen with 297 premium pen, which is APCR. So this is very, very nice. And all of these tanks should be played, well, from the T28 onwards, should be played frontline brawling style tank destroyers. From the T28, you then move on to the T95. And again, this is just following on the exact same thing. This has monstrous armor with also a 750 alpha damage gun with more than enough penetration for you to deal with pretty much anyone you meet. And then you follow on to the tier 10, which is the T110E3. You still have that 750 alpha damage, but you have 295 standard pen with AP and then 375 APCR rounds for your premium. It is lovely to have this much pen at tier 10, especially with the APCR, meaning that you don't have to worry about tracks or stuff like that. You just go to the front line, use your APCR, and just blitz through everything. This tank can be a real pain to deal with and is one of the most annoying tanks that you can actually face. Because the lower plate has loads and loads of spots that you can just bounce off of, even if you think that you have enough pen.
Yeah.
And the cupola on this tank isn't actually a weak spot. You need 300 and something pen to go through it. And it's probably closer to around about 350. And if you want to use heat, maybe 360, something like that. It is a lot of pen needed to reliably go through this cupola. So overall, this tech tree is really low skill cap, more so than like the mouse, because even though the mouse is slow and has armor, but you need to angle it, you don't need to angle this armor. You can literally just go head on in front of someone, and the chances of them penning you are pretty slim, especially with the E3. So at the end of the day, the E3 has a very low skill cap. I would say that this is a golden line to actually go down as one of your first, but you need to realize that these are very slow vehicles. Once you get to T28, you no longer have basically any speed. As long as you understand that, you'll be fine to go down this line, and you'll do very, very well. It has, as I said, a very low skill cap. You don't have to even angle the armor or anything like that. You can just face someone directly in front and they'll just bounce. At least for the E3, that is. For the others, they do have cupolas that can be penned, but on the most part, it's a pretty low skill cap line. Moving on to the T110E4. Now, this tank is basically you take the E3, you give it a turret, not fully traversable, but you then worsen the armor as well. The line diverts from the Wolverine at tier 5 to go on to the Hellcat. Now, this is already one of the fan favourites around there, or at least it used to be. It's been nerfed throughout the years, not as good as it used to be. However, this is still an okay tank to go through. This is still a good vehicle, in my opinion. You can then go and move on to the T25-2, another very nice tank. The T28 prototype, and this is where it starts to then form into the line. A lot like with the previous line, where it's the T28 and onwards are really the tanks that you're going to be playing, or the tanks that you'll evolve into. The same thing goes with the T20 prototype. You go and get the T28 prototype, which has good enough armor, but not impenetrable armor. You do get the same gun that is on the T28, so 400 alpha, very good pen. And then you'll move up to T30. It's a little bit different from the T28 because the T28 at least has some form of hull armor. This doesn't. And some people will say that this turret is also not that good. In my opinion, it's good enough to bounce the majority of tanks that you meet. The only issue why people say that it's not very good is that it's basically the same turret that's on the T34 at tier 8, which is a heavy tank. And even the T29 that's at tier 7 as well. But it's good enough, in my opinion, to bounce a fair few shots. You don't act like you have loads and loads of armor in this tank line, because you don't. If people know what they're doing against you, you're going to get penned. It's not like the E3, where you can just go around a corner and they'll probably bounce. With this, you go around a corner, you better be ready to take the shot, because you don't really have that much time to sit there and aim, because they will then shoot you. But once you go through the T30, which does have a 750 alpha damage gun, again, exactly the same gun as the T95. All of these, when they have a turret, are a little bit worse than if they didn't have a turret. So keep that in mind. I've said that before already, but any time that you have a tank line which uses the same gun, usually the one that's on non-turreted is a little bit better than the one that's on the turret. Just because the turrets are a little bit more flexible, so it makes sense. But then you move on to the E4 at tier 10, and again, exactly the same gun that's on the E3. A little bit worse though, and this tank is fine. It's nothing amazing, and this is obviously pre-buff, but even after the buff, it's nothing exceptional. The armor on this vehicle is not great, because if you remember the E3 cupola, this is unpennable. This is very, very pennable. This is an easy cupola to be able to hit. You don't need as much pen or anywhere near as much pen to go through an E4 as you do with an E3. But what you lack in the armor, you do make up for in a little bit of flexibility regarding having a turret. In my opinion, I would rather play an E3 over an E4. And not to mention that yes, this does get a turret, but it's not a fully traversable turret. It'll only go out to around about here, and obviously here on either side before it needs to start turning the vehicle. So just keep that in mind. The E4 is a good vehicle, but it's not, in my opinion, as good as an E3. And also there is another thing that we need to mention with the E4. They are slightly faster than the E3. So in general, all of these tanks, the T28 prototype, T30 and the E4 are all slightly faster than their counterparts. So keep that in mind as well. But overall, the E4 line, I'd say like this is a medium sort of skill level, because it's not one of those tanks that you just play.
Ali šteta, znači ne može više sam sebi da raznese.
You do need to know what you're doing with it, and it's not one of those tanks that I'd recommend people to grind first. We now move on to arguably, at the time of recording this, the best heavy tank at tier 10, the T110E5. But just because this tank is one of the best at tier 10 does not mean that you should grind it first. Because the E5 at tier 10 is actually slightly different to all the others in the line. You see, you start out obviously going down the standard tech tree up until you get to tier 5, which then turns into the T1 Heavy, the start of the heavy tanks. This is an extremely good tank. You'll blitz your way through this. You go to the M6, which is borderline OP, and you'll blitz your way through that. You then move on to the T29, which has the choice of two guns. You either have the 105 or the 90mm. The 90mm is more competitive currently, so use either one of them. It really depends on personal preference, but the 90 is a little bit better. Although you do lack penetration for the standard rounds on the 90 in comparison to the 105. But once you go through this, and this is a very good tank as well, you then move on to the T32, which is a very, very good tank at tier 8. You have a 105mm gun with decent enough pen and good enough alpha with 320 alpha right there. And then you move on to the M103. The M103 is where things can either go well or bad, depending on the player. Now, the reason why I say it will go well or bad is that with this top gun, you have 340 heat. If you are going to be spamming the heat, you will love this tank. If you don't spam the heat, you're probably not going to have that much of a fun time. Not to mention that the armor layout on this vehicle is not exactly fantastic, let's say. You have a big old cupola on the top of the tank, which you will get penned. Now, there is also just random points in the gun mantlet that you will also get penned in. If they're firing premium rounds, expect to take damage. This is not a super well armored turret. The hull armor is good for the most part. However, there are points that you just die. For example, this is not a lower plate that is like the E3 or the E4 where it's random bounces. If someone shoots it, you're going to get penned. You can side scrape up until a certain degree, but in the turret ring right here, you will get penned. There are lots and lots of nuances with the M103 that make it not that enjoyable to play overall. But then also the gun, when it works, is just amazing. 340 heat really is the main selling point of this vehicle. And combine that with decent DPM, decent accuracy. When the gun starts singing, yes, it's lovely. If you manage to get through the M103 or love going through the M103, you then get to the T110E5. You get the same gun that was on the M103, but now it's just better. More DPM, more accuracy, less aim time, everything that you loved about the previous gun on this one upgraded. But if you remember at the start, I said that the E5 is a little bit different from all the others. You see, all the others have quite a low skill cap requirement to actually play them. The T1 Heavy, M6, T32, T29, all of these, all the way throughout the tech tree, not that much skill level is required to really make the most out of them. You go hold down, you can do a little bit of side scraping if you can, most of it is great. With this vehicle, you can't really go hold down because you have a big old cupola. If I just take off the style that I had, you can see here, this is a very large cupola that is always visible.
Pa raznesi ga skroz bog te mazo, znači jebote. Light tank znači ne može da mu napravi full damage.
If they go a bit left, a bit right because it's so curved, it will bounce. But if they're firing heat, expect that cupola to be pretty easily penned. You can gun block it and you can wiggle and just be annoying in general, but it takes a lot of learning to get the most out of the E5. This is not a tank that you can just get into and not really do anything and expect to do well. It takes a little bit more finesse to really master the E5. The lower plate is annoying because it will just have random ricochet points, and much like the E3, E4, it's very similar in this regard. Anything with T110, usually the lower plate is a bit of a problem. It can side scrape, but be warned that if you do reach like a 150 caliber gun, you can get overmatched. But the reason why the E5 is so strong at the moment is because it's a complete package. The armor on the whole is really, really good. The turret armor is really, really good apart from the cupola. But if you manage to hide that cupola, this thing is truly unstoppable at times. Combine that with a gun that has, well, 3.5k DPM here for me. It's lovely. 340 heat, blitzes through people, and you have all the DPM to boot. So the E5 overall, medium skill cap. The problem is that
Heavy napravi više damage nego lightu.
And it is a high skill cap tank, but the rest of the line is pretty low skill cap. So as you progress up through the higher tiers, the M103 and the E5, the M103 does teach you about what's going to come up with the E5, but not really preparing you that much. So overall, medium skill cap, and it's just a lovely line to play, to be honest. Not one that I'd say you go down first, but overall, once you do know what you're doing, go and get this tank. We now move on to the M5Y. Now, from the tier 7 onwards, it actually has a reserve track mechanic. Now, this is where, if you actually want to track the vehicle and immobilize it, you need to shoot the rear of the vehicle. This then means that hardening for track health related items isn't really that important, because if you just show your front track, you're still going. Like, you can still go backwards and forwards, left, right, it doesn't matter, because you have that reserve track. So anything up to the, or from the tier 7 onwards, has this mechanic. Obviously, you start the tech tree line diverting from the tier 1 heavy to the Polak tank. This is fine. It's not, there's nothing that's exceptional about this tank. You'll get through it and get to the M2Y pretty quickly. Once you do get to the M2Y, which is where it really starts to use this line and mechanics, etc., this gun is fine. 240 alpha, 202 standard pen, and 242 premium pen. Really, really good pen actually for the tier 7 here. More than the T29. As you can see though, this tank does have an almighty cupola on top of the vehicle and a side profile that is very long. You then move on to the M3Y, which is basically the same thing. And again, once you get it fully upgraded, you'll see that it's a pretty similar kind of style tank. It's not as long as the previous vehicle, and it also doesn't have as big of a cupola for the weak spot. You do get a very nice gun, 215 standard pen, 320 alpha, much the same as the T32, but a little bit more standard pen, which is always nice to see. And then you'll move on to the M6Y. The M6Y might be the worst tier 9 heavy tank in existence. It does get a good gun, 253 standard pen and 310 heat. 310 heat is fine at tier 9, let's be honest. You're not going to be seeing that many tanks that need loads and loads of heat pen unless you meet tier 10. But for the most part, 310 is enough. The problem with this vehicle is that, as you can see, as we slowly fully upgrade it, once you get the turret, it has 2 cupolas for people to pick from. And the worst thing about this is that it's at tier 9. I would rather play the tier 8 than play this thing at tier 9. It does teach you what the line is going to turn into eventually, but it's just not an enjoyable experience playing this tank with just 2 little ears on top just wiggling at the enemy constantly. So good luck when you get this tank. Gun is good. The rest of it is awful. Once you do suffer through and get to the tier 10, you are then greeted with the M5Y. As you can see, very, very different. More slim, less of a cupola issue, and overall, pretty good hold down vehicle. The problem is it has no hull armor. So as soon as you need to throw in side scrape or do anything of that nature or expose your hull, you're going to have issues. This tank dreams of being on a ridge line and nowhere else. It does get the choice of 2 guns. You can either go for the 105, which is less alpha, but a little bit more pen, or you can go for the 120, which has 440 alpha, but a little bit less pen. However, the vast majority of you should probably go for the 120 because alpha is better for heavy. But if you are someone that doesn't really care and you just say, I want the gun handling and everything else, then go for the little gun. Overall, the M5Y is fine. It's a good tank. But, again, as I've said, it dreams of being a ridgeline and nothing else. And the entire line kind of dreams like that as well. For that reason, I wouldn't say that you should go down this as one of your first, because it's really not a tank that is super low skill cap. This is probably quite high, in all honesty, especially the M5Y, because you really need to know what you're doing with it. If you go up to a ridgeline and then you expose yourself to the side profile of a tank, you die. If you don't go one-on-one, like directly in front of someone, you're in for a rough ride. So overall, I'd say medium skill cap for this line. It's not one that is super easy to play, but it's not super hard to play either. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's hard to play hold down, because it's definitely not. But you do need to know what you're doing with the vehicles. We now move on to one of my favourite tanks at tier 10, the T37 Heavy. The T37 Heavy line starts its life as a medium tank. You go all the way down to T6 medium and then move up to the M4A1. The vast majority of you will have probably played this game to go and play a Sherman or a Tiger or something of that nature, so most of you should be pretty familiar with a Sherman. From the Sherman, which is completely fine to play, you'll slowly get your way through it. You then move on to the EZ8, and this again, very similar. It has that rapid fire, low alpha kind of gun. You then move on to T20, and nothing is really an issue so far. The T20 is just a good tank overall. You do get a 90mm gun, which is very nice to see at tier 7. You then progress up to the T69. Now, this used to be really bad. It's definitely improved in recent years, and I haven't actually played it recently, but the gun is definitely good enough. You have 280 heat rounds, which is super nice, so you can definitely spam some people with that. And also, 200 pen is not great, but not awful either. DPM-wise, actually pretty good for an autoloader as well, at nearly 2,000, and the accuracy is not bad at all. You then progress from this, which shouldn't take you too long. It's not a bad vehicle in all. You're still a medium at this stage, however, but you then move up to the heavy, which is the T54E1. Yes, you're going to have to spend all of this time up until tier 9 to actually reach the heavy tank status. The E1, however, does get a gun which is 390 alpha and doesn't have any HE rounds. You have the choice between a 248 Standard Pen, which is AP, or the 310 APCR. So the vast majority of times that you face an E1, you are going to get spammed with APCR because, yeah, majority of them are just going to not see the point of firing the AP round. However, to grind this vehicle, you are going to have to go through the 90 caliber gun, and there is no way of actually getting the 105 until you get the E1. So you're still going to have to grind this out, which is 43k research to actually get this gun. So just be warned, the stock grind could really suck on this vehicle. But once you go through this, you get the T57 Heavy, which in my opinion is well worth it. You then get a 400 alpha damage gun, which is basically the same gun that you get on the E5, but it's an autoloader. You also get 3,100 DPM nearly base. All of that combined with decent accuracy. The aim time is a little bad. This tank can just demolish someone for 1,600 damage in like 6 seconds. The only issue really with this vehicle, because it's actually fairly balanced overall, because it doesn't have any armor realistically. It does have some on the top half of the turret, but on the bottom half of the turret and the hull armor, not really. The only issue is that it really does run out of ammo pretty fast, which is why we have a little bit of gold ammo. Obviously, the 340 heat, again, is the highlight of this vehicle, combined with that super fast unload time. It's just a lovely vehicle. It is the ultimate ambushing vehicle, but it is not a super easy tank to play. This is not a super high skill cap, but it's definitely not easy. So overall, for this tank line, medium skill level. I think that as you move up, it's a little bit easier, and the